The old auditorium lights buzzed softly overhead as students gathered for the annual talent show Signups. The worn wooden stage had seen countless performances over the years, but tonight felt different. The air was thick with excitement and whispers as small groups huddled near the Signup sheet, planning their acts. Mai stood in the shadows of the heavy velvet curtains, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had walked past this Signup sheet every day for the past week, always finding a reason to turn away. But today was different. Today, she wouldn't let fear win. From her hiding spot, she watched the usual scene unfold. Lily Brooks and her friends, dressed in matching designer outfits, crowded around the sheet, giggling as they wrote their names in the prime slots. They were the queens of Pine Valley High, and everyone knew it. Their dance routine had won first place 3 years in a row, and they never let anyone forget it. "Did you see what she was wearing in math class today?" May overheard one of them say, followed by cruel laughter that echoed through the auditorium. She knew they were talking about her. Her second-hand clothes and quiet demeanor had made her an easy target since freshman year. The Signup sheet was almost full now. Mi's fingers brushed against the folded piece of paper in her pocket. The song she had written herself, the one she practiced late at night when her little siblings were asleep. The one that made her grandmother smile and say, "That's the voice of an angel, little one." A group of boys from the basketball team swaggered past, their Letterman jackets creating a sea of school colors. One of them glanced at May and nudged his friend, smirking. She shrank further into the shadows, but something inside her refused to run away. Not this time. Mr. Rodriguez, the music teacher, was starting to pack up his things. 5 minutes left for Signups. He called out, his voice bouncing off the auditorium walls. Mai watched as Lily's group took selfies by the stage, already practicing their victory speeches. The clock ticked. 4 minutes. 3, 2. Mi's legs felt like lead as she finally stepped out of the shadows. The remaining students turned to stare as her footsteps echoed across the wooden floor. She could hear the whispers starting already. "Isn't that the quiet girl from chemistry? What's she doing here?" Lily's group stopped their photo session to watch, phones raised slightly, ready to capture any moment of embarrassment. But Mi kept walking. Each step felt like climbing a mountain, but she didn't stop. Not when she heard the snickers. Not when someone coughed dramatically. Not when she felt dozens of eyes burning into her back. With trembling fingers, she picked up the pen. The metal was cool against her skin as she wrote her name in the last available slot. The final performance of the night. Her handwriting looked small and uncertain next to Lily's flourishing signature. But it was there. It was real. Well, Lily's voice cut through the silence. "Looks like we'll have some extra entertainment this year." Her friends laughed on cue, the sound sharp and practiced. But something unexpected happened as Mai turned to leave. Mr. Rodriguez was watching her with a slight smile, the kind that said he knew something others didn't. He had heard her once, singing quietly in the music room after school when she thought the building was empty. He knew what they all were about to find out. Mai walked out of the auditorium with her head held high, even as she heard Lily's group already planning ways to document her performance. They had no idea that the quiet girl they mocked had a secret weapon, a voice that could silence every laugh, every sneer, every doubting whisper. The heavy doors closed behind her with a thud that felt like destiny. In 2 weeks, these same doors would open to a night that would change everything. But for now, Mai allowed herself a small smile. She had taken the first step, and sometimes that's the hardest part of any journey. Steam rose from the tiny kitchen as Mi's grandmother stirred a pot of her famous noodle soup. The kitchen was her sanctuary, a place where memories of her days as a celebrated singer in Shanghai came alive through the stories she shared while cooking. The walls had heard more songs than anyone could count, especially in the quiet hours when the rest of the house slept. This evening was different, though. Instead of the usual quiet humming, real music filled the small space. Mai stood by the sink, washing dishes and letting her voice dance with the melody playing from her old phone. She thought her grandmother was too busy cooking to notice, but the elderly woman's eyes sparkled as she watched her granddaughter lost in song. "You have a gift," grandmother said softly in Mandarin, making me jump and nearly drop a plate. "Just like the songbirds that used to wake me in Shanghai." Mai quickly turned down the music, her cheeks burning red. "I didn't think anyone was listening," she mumbled, focusing intently on scrubbing a perfectly clean bowl. Her grandmother set down her wooden spoon and walked over, her traditional house slippers making soft shuffling sounds against the worn linoleum floor. "That's the problem, little one. You've been hiding your voice for so long, it's forgotten how to fly." Through the small kitchen window, they could see the neighbors' kids playing basketball in the fading daylight. Their shouts and laughter drifted in, reminding Mai of the school hallways where she tried to make herself invisible. At school, Mai started, then stopped, placing the bowl in the drying rack. It's different there. People already have their ideas about who should be in the spotlight. Her grandmother's weathered hands reached for a photo tucked behind the rice container. It showed a young woman in a stunning traditional dress, standing on a grand stage. "You know, when I first started singing in Shanghai, people said I didn't belong on stage. My family was poor, we had no connections. But music?" She tapped her chest. "Music lives in here. It doesn't care about what others think." The soup bubbled, calling for attention, but grandmother wasn't done. "I've heard you practicing in your room late at night. You think I'm sleeping, but these old ears still work pretty well." She winked, moving back to the stove. May dried her hands on a kitchen towel, thinking about the talent show sign-up sheet from earlier that day. "But grandmother, you were trained. You knew what you were doing. I just sing." The old woman laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "And who says I can't train you?" These hands may be wrinkled now, but they still remember every technique, every breath control exercise, every secret that turned a poor girl from Shanghai into someone who could silence a room with a single note. Something stirred in May's chest, a mixture of hope and fear. "But the talent show is in 2 weeks. That's not enough time to." 2 weeks? Her grandmother's eyes lit up with a familiar spark, the same one that appeared when she was about to try an experimental recipe. "You'd be surprised what can happen in 2 weeks when you have 60 years of experience guiding you." She reached into a cabinet and pulled out a dusty folder filled with yellowing papers covered in musical notations. "These are my old exercise books, the same ones that built my voice from a whisper to a storm." Her fingers traced the faded characters lovingly. Perhaps it's time they helped another voice learn to soar. May took the folder with trembling hands. The pages smelled of time and dreams, of distant stages and standing ovations. But what about school? The others, they're expecting me to fail. Her grandmother turned off the stove and faced her fully. "Then let them expect. The best performances come when no one sees them coming." She gently tucked a strand of hair behind Me's ear. "Besides, I think it's time Pine Valley High learned what real music sounds like." In that moment, the kitchen felt different. It was no longer just a place for cooking and quiet songs. It had become a training ground, a place where 2 generations of voices would meet to create something extraordinary. The neighbors' basketball game continued outside, but inside, a transformation was about to begin. The library was usually May's safe haven during lunch break, but today something was different. She sat at her usual corner table, trying to focus on her history textbook, when snippets of conversation floated over from behind the nearest bookshelf. "Did you see the sign-up sheet?" It was Lily's voice, trying to whisper but failing. "Little Miss Nobody actually thinks she can perform." "Oh my gosh, we have to record it." Another voice chimed in. "It'll be epic." Remember when she had to do that presentation in English class? She could barely speak. Me's hands tightened around her pencil. She should have been used to this by now, but something had changed inside her. 2 weeks of evening practices with her grandmother had awakened something she thought she'd lost: her courage. I already created a group chat, Lily continued. Everyone's going to have their phones ready. We'll make it go viral. The pencil in Mi's hand snapped. She stood up so quickly her chair scraped against the floor, drawing looks from other students. But for once, she didn't shrink from the attention. Walking past the bookshelf, she locked eyes with Lily and her friends. They fell silent, obviously not expecting to be confronted. I heard every word, Mi said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. And you know what? Go ahead. Film everything. Just make sure you get my good side. Their shocked expressions were almost worth the countless times they'd made her feel small. As she walked out of the library, she could hear them whispering frantically behind her. But their words couldn't touch her anymore. In the hallway, she pulled out her phone and opened the video her grandmother had helped her record last night. They'd been practicing for hours, perfecting a piece that blended traditional Chinese opera with modern pop music. It was unlike anything Pine Valley High had ever heard before. The bell rang, and students flooded the corridor. Someone bumped into her, making her drop her phone. When she bent to pick it up, she noticed a new scratch across the screen, right over the music video she'd been watching for inspiration. Sorry about that. A voice called out, not sounding sorry at all. More snickers followed. But instead of feeling defeated, Mi felt a strange calm settle over her. She thought about her grandmother's words from their morning practice. Let their doubt fuel your fire. During chemistry class, she could see Lily and her friends shooting glances at her, probably planning their viral video moment. Their phones kept lighting up with new messages in their group chat. Little did they know, they were about to become part of a very different kind of viral story. After school, instead of heading straight home, Mi took a detour to the music room. Mr. Rodriguez was there, organizing sheet music. "Sir," she said, making him look up, "I need to practice on the actual stage. Would that be possible?" He smiled, pulling out a key ring. "I was wondering when you'd ask. The auditorium's all yours until the janitor needs to clean." Standing center stage in the empty auditorium, Mi closed her eyes. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice. "Breathe from your diaphragm. Let your voice fill every corner." She began to sing, softly at first, then with growing confidence. The ancient Chinese melodies her grandmother had taught her merged seamlessly with contemporary rhythms, creating something entirely new. Her voice bounced off the walls, filling the space with sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep within her soul. She was so lost in the music that she didn't notice Mr. Rodriguez standing at the back of the auditorium, or the fact that he'd started recording on his phone. She didn't see him smile and whisper, "They have no idea what's coming." When she finally opened her eyes, the stage lights felt different. This wasn't just about proving people wrong anymore. This was about proving something to herself. The viral video they were planning. Maybe it would go viral, but not for the reasons they expected. Walking home that evening, Mi passed by the local coffee shop where Lily and her friends usually hung out. Through the window, she could see them huddled around their phones, probably still planning their moment of triumph. Mi smiled to herself, knowing that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's rising above. The kitchen had transformed into something magical over the past few days. Sheet music covered the refrigerator, held up by mismatched magnets. The tiny space between the stove and the sink had become a makeshift stage where Mi practiced her breathing exercises while her grandmother cooked dinner. Again, her grandmother said, stirring a pot of rice porridge with one hand while conducting with her wooden spoon in the other. "Remember what I taught you about breath control. Feel it in your stomach, not your chest." Mi closed her eyes, trying to focus. Her throat was sore from hours of practice, but there was no time to rest. The talent show was just days away. "You're still thinking too much," her grandmother observed, setting down her spoon. "Here, watch me." The elderly woman straightened her back, and suddenly the kitchen was filled with a crystal clear note that seemed impossible coming from someone so small. The sound vibrated through the walls, making the windows hum slightly. "That's the secret technique I learned from my old teacher in Shanghai," she explained, her eyes twinkling. "She called it riding the dragon's breath. It's been passed down through generations of performers." Mai watched in amazement as her grandmother demonstrated again. This time, she noticed how her grandmother's whole body seemed to become part of the music, not just her voice. "Now you try," her grandmother encouraged. "But this time, don't think about the notes. Think about why you're singing." Mai took a deep breath and began. The ancient Chinese melody flowed from her lips stronger than before. When she reached the transition point, where traditional opera merged with modern pop, something clicked. The two styles no longer fought each other. They danced together, creating something entirely new. Her grandmother clapped excitedly, almost knocking over the pot of porridge. "That's it. That's what I've been waiting to hear." Later that evening, while helping with the dishes, Mai found the courage to ask something that had been bothering her. "Grandmother, weren't you ever scared when you performed in Shanghai?" The old woman dried her hands on her apron and reached for a small wooden box on top of the refrigerator. Inside was a collection of old photographs and newspaper clippings, yellowed with age. "Look at this one," she said, pulling out a faded photo. It showed a packed theater, with her grandmother standing on stage in a beautiful traditional dress. "This was my first major performance. I was terrified. My knees were shaking so badly, I thought I might fall over." Mai studied the photo closely. "But you look so confident." "That's because I had a secret weapon." Her grandmother pulled out an old jade pendant from the box. "My teacher gave me this before the performance. She said it carried the voices of all the singers who came before me." She placed the pendant in Mei's hand. "Now it's your turn to carry their strength." The jade felt cool against Mei's palm, smooth from years of nervous fingers holding it before performances. "But what if I forget the words? Or mess up the transition?" Her grandmother smiled. "Then you'll keep singing anyway. Perfect performances are boring. It's the imperfect ones that touch people's hearts." They practiced late into the night, long after the rest of the household had gone to bed. The jade pendant hung around Mei's neck, seemed to grow warmer with each note she sang. Mr. Rodriguez had given her permission to practice on the school stage during lunch breaks, and now she understood why her grandmother had insisted on it. The acoustics were completely different from their kitchen. Each day, she stayed a little longer, getting comfortable with the space that would soon hold her moment of truth. What she didn't know was that someone had been listening. The school janitor, an elderly man who usually kept to himself, had heard her practicing. During one session, he adjusted the stage lights without saying a word, creating the perfect spotlight. When Mai thanked him, he simply nodded and said, "My wife used to sing opera in Vietnam. Your voice, it reminds me of her." That simple comment gave Mai another boost of confidence. She wasn't just carrying her own dreams anymore, or even just her grandmother's legacy. She was carrying something bigger, the power of music to connect people across generations, across cultures, across all the artificial barriers people create. The jade pendant became her constant companion, a reminder that some things are worth being brave for. In quiet moments between classes, she would hold it and imagine all the singers who had come before her, each one facing their own fears, their own doubters, their own moments of truth. The evening of the talent show arrived with an electric energy in the air. Cars filled the school parking lot, and excited chatter echoed through the hallways. Backstage, the atmosphere was a mixture of nervous energy and last-minute preparations. Mai stood in front of the dusty mirror in the dressing room, barely recognizing herself. Her grandmother had insisted on lending her a modern version of a traditional Chinese dress, deep blue with silver threads that caught the light when she moved. The jade pendant hung at her neck, seeming to pulse with the beating of her heart. 5 minutes until showtime. Mr. Rodriguez called out, clipboard in hand, as he hurried past the dressing rooms. In the mirror, Mai could see Lily and her friends huddled in the corner, phones ready. They were wearing matching sparkly outfits for their dance routine, but their attention was focused entirely on her. One of them pointed and whispered something, causing the others to giggle. Mi's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her dress. The butterflies in her stomach felt more like angry birds now. She closed her eyes, remembering her grandmother's words. Nervousness and excitement feel the same in your body. It's your mind that decides which one it is. Through the walls, she could hear the muffled sound of the audience filling the auditorium. Her little brother had promised to record the whole thing for their parents, who couldn't get off work in time. But her grandmother would be there, sitting in the back row, because she insisted that's where you could best hear the acoustics. The first act was announced, and the show began. Mai paced backstage, watching other performers come and go. There was the kid who could solve a Rubik's Cube in under a minute, the twins who played a piano duet, and a group that performed a scene from a play. Then came Lily's group's dance performance. Even Mai had to admit they were good. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, and the audience loved it. As they came off stage, sweaty but grinning, Lily shot Mai a look that clearly said, "Try to top that." The jade pendant felt heavier now. Mai touched it gently, thinking about all the performers who had worn it before her. She thought about her grandmother, standing on stages in Shanghai, probably feeling these same butterflies. The acts continued, each one bringing her closer to her moment. Her phone buzzed. A message from her grandmother. "Remember, little one, the music lives in your heart. Let it fly." Mr. Rodriguez appeared again, gesturing for Mai to take her position. "You're up next," he whispered, giving her an encouraging smile. "The stage is yours." As she waited in the wings, Mai could see Lily's friends positioning themselves around the auditorium, phones held high. They thought they were preparing to capture a moment of humiliation, but Mai touched her pendant and smiled. They were about to capture something very different. The current act finished, and applause filled the auditorium. Mr. Rodriguez stepped onto the stage to announce the final performance of the night. Mai took one last deep breath, feeling the dragon's breath her grandmother had taught her about. From her spot backstage, she could see the janitor adjusting the spotlight one final time. He caught her eye and gave a slight nod, as if to say, "Show them what real music sounds like." The lights dimmed, and Mr. Rodriguez's voice rang out. "And now, for our final performance of the evening." Mai stepped forward, the stage lights warming her face. In the audience, she could see dozens of phone screens glowing in the darkness, all pointed at her. Her grandmother sat in the back row, hands folded in her lap, radiating calm confidence. The music would start in exactly 10 seconds. 10 seconds that felt like an eternity. 10 seconds in which her entire journey, from hiding in the kitchen to standing on the stage, flashed through her mind. The first note of the backing track began to play, and Mai closed her eyes. It was time to show everyone what happens when you underestimate the quiet ones. The spotlight felt warm on Mi's face as she stood center stage. In the darkness beyond, she could hear whispers and a few scattered coughs. Someone in the front row snickered. The blue dress her grandmother had lent her sparkled under the lights, and the jade pendant seemed to pulse with each beat of her racing heart. The backing track began softly, a gentle melody that would bridge two worlds. Mai took one final breath, feeling it deep in her stomach, just as her grandmother had taught her. This was the moment of truth. The first notes left her lips soft and clear. Traditional Chinese opera filled the auditorium, the ancient melody floating up to the rafters. She could hear a few surprised gasps from the audience. This wasn't what they had expected, not from the quiet girl who barely spoke in class. In the front row, phones that had been raised to record her expected failure slowly lowered, their owners transfixed. The pure notes of her voice commanded attention, telling a story that needed no translation. As the first verse ended, Mai opened her eyes. The stage lights made it hard to see individual faces, but she could make out her grandmother in the back row, sitting perfectly straight, hands folded in her lap. That sight gave her the courage for what came next. The music shifted, and with it, her voice transformed. The traditional melody began to weave with a contemporary pop song, something everyone in the audience would recognize, but never like this. The two styles danced together, neither overwhelming the other, creating something entirely new. A phone slipped from someone's hand in the front row, clattering to the floor. Nobody moved to pick it up. Even the usual shuffling and whispers had ceased. The entire auditorium held its breath. Mi's voice grew stronger with each note. All those hours practicing in the kitchen, all those moments of doubt, all those snickers in the hallway, they all fell away. There was only the music now, flowing through her like a river. In the wings, Mr. Rodriguez stood with his mouth slightly open, his clipboard forgotten in his hands. The janitor had stopped his work to listen, leaning on his mop with a knowing smile. Even the stage lights seemed to glow a little brighter. As she reached the bridge of the song, the most challenging part where traditional and modern styles fully merged, Mi caught a glimpse of Lily's face in the audience. The usual smirk was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like wonder. The jade pendant felt warm against her skin as she hit the highest note, holding it clear and strong, just as her grandmother had taught her. The sound filled every corner of the auditorium, touching something deep and universal in everyone who heard it. Time seemed to slow down. In that moment, Mai wasn't performing anymore. She was flying. Every note carried her higher. Every word told her story. She wasn't just the quiet girl anymore. She was her grandmother's granddaughter, carrying generations of music in her voice. The final notes of the song approached, the moment when both styles would come together one last time. Mi's voice soared through the combination, making it sound as natural as breathing. The last note hung in the air like a star, bright and perfect. Then silence. Complete, absolute silence. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The phones that had been raised to record her failure hung forgotten in limp hands. Even the usual creaks and groans of the old auditorium seemed to be holding their peace. Mai stood in the spotlight, her heart pounding. The silence stretched on, becoming almost unbearable. Had she made a terrible mistake? Had her grandmother been wrong about her talent? And then, from the back row, a single person stood up. Even through the stage lights, Mai could see it was her grandmother, tears streaming down her face. The old woman's hands came together in the first clap, the sound sharp and clear in the silent auditorium. Like a wave building from the deep, the applause began to grow. The applause rolled through the auditorium like thunder. One by one, people rose to their feet until the entire audience was standing. Mi's little brother jumped up and down in his seat, still holding his phone to record everything. The sound was deafening, bouncing off the walls and filling every corner of the space. Through the stage lights, Mai could see faces that had minutes ago been waiting to laugh, now beaming with genuine amazement. Phones were still raised, but they weren't capturing failure. They were preserving a moment of pure magic. Mr. Rodriguez appeared at the edge of the stage, gesturing for her to take a bow. As she did, the applause grew even louder. Someone in the back whistled. She straightened up, feeling tears begin to form in her eyes, but these were different from all the tears she'd shed in school bathrooms and quiet corners. These were tears of triumph. As she left the stage, still shaking slightly from adrenaline, she was surprised to find a small crowd waiting in the wings. The janitor was there, nodding with satisfaction. "Just like my wife," he said softly before disappearing back to his duties. Several other performers surrounded her, asking questions all at once. "Where did you learn to sing like that? How did you combine those styles? Can you teach me that breathing technique?" But the moment that stuck with her most came when Lily stepped forward from the group. The usual confidence was gone from her face, replaced by something that looked almost like embarrassment. I Oh. Lily struggled with her words. That was incredible. I mean, really incredible. I had no idea you could. She stopped, seeming to realize how her previous actions must look now. Mai touched the jade pendant at her neck, feeling its comforting warmth. Thank you, she said simply. Sometimes the best response to past unkindness is simple grace. Her grandmother appeared backstage, moving through the crowd like a tiny ship parting waves. Without a word, she wrapped Mei in a tight hug. You did it, little one, she whispered in Mandarin. You found your voice. Later that night, as they drove home, Mei's phone kept buzzing with notifications. The videos were spreading across social media, but not as the fail compilation that had been planned. Instead, people were sharing it with messages like, "You have to see this," and "most amazing performance ever." Someone had even started a challenge where people tried to sing both styles together, though none came close to what Mai had done. Her brother showed her the view count, which was climbing by the minute. The next morning at school felt different. The usual whispers followed her through the hallway, but they weren't mocking anymore. People smiled at her, some even stopped to congratulate her. A few freshmen asked for her autograph, making her laugh. During lunch break, she found herself invited to sit with the other performers from the show. They were already planning collaborations, asking if she'd help with their music projects. The table that had once seemed so exclusive was now open and welcoming. But the real change wasn't in how others treated her, it was in how she carried herself. The jade pendant still hung around her neck, but she no longer needed it for courage. Her grandmother had been right all along. The music had always been inside her, waiting to be set free. That evening, she returned to her grandmother's kitchen. The old exercise books were still spread out on the counter, but now they didn't look like homework anymore. They looked like treasures, waiting to be shared. Teach me more, she said to her grandmother, who was preparing dinner. I want to learn everything. The elderly woman smiled, putting down her cooking spoon. First, she said, pulling out an even older book from a drawer, let me tell you about the ancient masters who created these techniques. Their stories are as important as their songs. As they sat together in the warm kitchen, sharing stories and songs passed down through generations, Mei realized something important. The talent show hadn't just been about proving people wrong. It had been about proving herself right. And sometimes, that's the most powerful performance of all. The phones that had been raised to mock her had instead captured something beautiful. The moment when a quiet girl found her voice and used it to build bridges between cultures, between generations, and between people who might never have connected otherwise. In the end, the mockers hadn't just been left speechless. They'd been given a new way to speak, to listen, and to understand.